Okay, there you go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second session of Tech Train. This is a month-long learning series focusing on accelerating the readiness of our technical trainers and teachers, and is being brought to you by the Philippine Society for Talent Development. Let me check our Zoom room and greet our early participants. Let me see if we have people here. Okay, good morning, Ronaldin, Nelisa from Angeles City, Christine, good morning, Rodeline, magandang umaga. We have Larry Meren, good morning to you. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Evie, good morning. And from Butuan City, Taytay, okay, we have people from Tugigaraw. Jeanette Abilar, good morning. Ginalyn, hello, hello. We're live in Facebook, by the way. And as you can see here, last April, PSTD gathered 60 volunteers and launched a well-meaning program called Oplan Hope, meaning Hang On People Enablers. This is to support talent development practitioners to adapt and remain productive as we all move to a new way of learning in the virtual space. By the way, I am Luz Mercurio, and I am the chair of PSTD's Learn from Home series. For the past 4 months, we have been providing free webinars to help HR and learning professionals, including members of the academy, to adjust and learn fast as talent developers using the virtual platform. To date, we have offered 69 classes with the help of more than 100 subject matter experts and thought leaders from different parts of the world who volunteered as speakers and moderators. As of today, we have more than 17,000 Zoom attendees and over 1 million minutes viewed in Zoom, plus over 300,000 minutes viewed through Facebook. Thanks to all of you who have been learning with us for more than 4 months now. Okay, in case your friends can't make it to this session, we can ask them to view the recorded version in our FB page. Just key in facebook.com/mypstd. Consider also to set up a watch party in Facebook so that your friends can benefit from the key insights from our speaker today. You can also watch you can have a watch party, by the way, and ask your friends to learn with you. Please like and share so others can learn what we are offering here in PSTD. By the way, PSTD offers paid sessions as well, no, to help sustain our organization. Support us by attending these webinars with targeted themes to enhance your talent development skills. We have Fundamentals of Facilitating Design Sprint on August 17 and 18 with Arthur Flores Jr. Next, we have Clear as Ice and create and deliver powerful virtual presentation on August 24 with Wawi Wong, and on August 26 to 28, May Soriano will facilitate a webinar on coaching versus crisis. Take a good look at this. From September to November, PSTD brings you a series of webinars that will enhance your capacity or your capability in managing the whole learning function. So from TNA to training design and facilitation, plus measuring the success of your training programs. So to register, please visit our website, www.pstd.org. We invite you also to be part of PSTD as members. We offer individual and corporate membership. So aside from the opportunity to network with amazing people enablers, you can enjoy special rates and free registrations to our various learning events and monthly meetings. We call it ETPanan. Visit us at www.pstd.org and click the link on how to be a member. You can also simply scan the QR code. Continue to learn and interact with us through various social media channels, including YouTube. For inquiries, send us an email through programs@pstd.org. You know, last month, we gainfully no, we were able to gather about 4,000 participants, mostly from the academe. So I'd like to know if you have attended any of these, please type I. If you attended any of the 8 sessions last month for DigiTeach, let me also know if you have attended the CHILAX. How many have you attended? Please type I and the number of sessions you have attended last month. Aurea, thank you. 3 for Joshua, Louis, Larry 1. CHILAX session, Cherry, thank you for attending. Jerry, thank you. Okay, we appreciate your continued patronage to our learning programs. Now, this August, we present to you what we call Tech Train, and we also want to support our technical trainers and educators identify which areas can be translated to virtual space and get valuable tips on how to sustain interest through synchronous and asynchronous mode of learning. Wow, 5 for Norma, 6 for Charlene and April, salamat. 8 for Eve, thank you. So as we move on, may I ask you to answer a quick poll. We have Jen here, our technical specialist, who will put up the poll. This demographic check will help us, and even our guest speaker, to have a good idea of the profile of our attendees and cite relevant examples to match expectations. So these are the questions, and they will be given by our tech support Jen. What type of talent development practitioner are you? Soft skill trainer, technical trainer, educator, coach, mentor, HR admin, manager, consultant. Second question, where are you calling from? Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao. And the third question is this your first time in PSD Learn from Home series? So we'll just wait for a while. Here we have the result. We have 24% soft skills trainer. Thank you for joining us. And then 22% technical trainers. We have educators. Maraming salamat po for your continued support. And then coach mentor 7%. HR 22%. We have also managers and executives at 14%, consultants at 5%. Next, where are you calling from? Majority, of course, from Luzon, 86%. And we have 11% from Mindanao and 4% from Visayas, Mayong Buntag. Is this your first time in PSTD Learn from Home series? 78%, suki na po namin, salamat po. And 22%, welcome to PSTD's Learn from Home series. So at this point, let me introduce our moderator. I'm happy to introduce to you the moderator of our session entitled Organizing a Blended Learning Event. He is Mr. Lawrence Ko, the Domain Manager for Talent in IO Manila, and is a very important part of our Learn from Home series team here in PSTD. Magandang umaga sa'yo, Lawrence. Good morning, everyone. Welcome.
Thank you for the introduction, Luz. And again, good morning to everyone. Hello to our 176 participants so far joining us today here in Zoom, and I know a couple more in Facebook Live. And as per our experience, we're going to be experiencing a gush of people as we start rolling and having our speaker share with us his thoughts and insights about the topic for this morning. But before I introduce our speaker, let me just go through a few house reminders. I've seen earlier that majority of us today are longtime attendees of our Learn from Home program, so this should be very familiar to you now. I'll start with the first one. And as you would notice, attendees will be on mute to manage the flow of information. But no worries, if you have any questions or if you have any insights, we're going to have two particular buttons there. The first one is if you're going to have any question, please use the Q&A tab in Zoom and use the chat tab if you have any comments or inputs. So please make sure that you toggle the configuration from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. So what we want is for your thoughts, your insights to also be read by your fellow learners and participants of this session. The last one is that we will issue certificates to the first 100 participants who will answer post-evals, which will automatically open on your browser after the end of this webinar. So can we just give a quick try? Good morning to Ana Maria Marabut, whose configuration is now changed to all panelists and attendees. Are you all ready to hear more about the topic this morning? Can you go to the chat and give a good yes or I am ready? Thank you to Alvin, Cherry, yes, Law. Yeah, the majority of you have already changed your configuration to all panelists and attendees, but I'm still seeing quite a few of you who's still on the all panelists. So kindly change that because we want to have a more lively interaction and discussion this morning. Thank you so much, Alisa, Mike, Reddy, Anna Marie, Joel Esguerra. Thank you so much for such enthusiastic energy that you're giving us this morning. And I'm sure that our speaker is very excited to share with us his thoughts and insights. Now, going to the next slide. For the past quarter or so in this pandemic, we have heard a lot of new or not so new industry buzzwords, one of which is blended learning. And this morning, we will learn more about it from our speaker who will share with us the ins and outs of this new modality. Our speaker has over 20 years as a learning and development professional and has worked in the UK, Europe, and Asia, including Italy, Germany, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. He has an extensive track record both as an in-class and virtual facilitator and has delivered events internationally to audiences of up to 3,000 people. As one of GE's master trainers, our speaker also enjoys travel and photography. Currently, he is the learning manager of GE Asia Pacific. And now to give us a talk on how to organize a blended learning event, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to our speaker, Mr. Simon Paice. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning, Lawrence. Good morning, Liz. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to be with you. Let me just call up my slides for our time together. There might be a slight delay whilst that happens, of course. But it's fantastic to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to learn from you. I think it's a two-way street. It's not just about me sharing. It's about you finding out from you about what's important to you. So a little bit of further information, as you can see from the photo. This is me, Simon Paice. I'm based in Sydney. If you know nothing about GE or General Electric, let me tell you a little bit about us. We're a big multinational company in about 150 something countries, I think it is now. We have 270-ish thousand people worldwide. And our main focus areas are the healthcare industry, power, renewables, and aviation. So you may have come across us in one of those particular areas. As Lawrence said, I have, as you can tell by the grey hair, a reasonable amount of experience. I don't assume, for that matter, I know everything. I'm quite the opposite. I don't, and I'd love to hear from you as we go through this session. As I've put there deliberately, my philosophy is keep it simple and have fun. And I think from one thing I can share without any hesitation over 25 years is that when you do keep it simple and you make it fun, people enjoy the learning opportunity and make the most of that. So I try and hopefully implement that as we go through this morning. Before I get in the content, I really want to just to sort of step back a little bit and make an observation, which is that I think, this year has been an amazing year, a challenging year, a year of opportunity as well. I have a fridge magnet at home that says, "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity." It's a quote from Einstein, and I think that really is true. There's lots and lots going on, and you could almost say that in the we've had 5 years of change in 5 months, and that's really a big issue for us to deal with. I've never seen anything like that in my career. So it's a pleasure to get the invitation from PSTD to be with you today. You may have, and I think I saw, 70-80% of you have been to a previous class, and I was watching a video of the one from June about moving from classroom to virtual, and I think some of my messaging today will hopefully build on that. But my task is really, I think, to set out a case for blended learning, particularly with an emphasis perhaps on technical training, and also what do we do in these COVID times. So I'll try and touch on those a little bit as we go through. There's a lot I could cover, from systems through to IT, administration, delivery, design. So I've had to sort of narrow my focus a little bit, but I'm happy to have an expanded conversation about that as we go through. And as I said, I'm really happy to have your questions as we go through this. So a little bit around what I want to cover. I want to, first of all, define what is blended learning, because you can read and hear a lot of things. So I have a definition. I'll share with you that in a minute. I'll talk about 2 different learning methodologies, just to clarify my focus today. And then I'm going to share a simple planning framework, which I hope might help you in terms of how you approach this topic of blended learning. And lastly, hopefully I can give you some tips and suggestions from my experience, and I'll do my best to answer your questions as towards the end. So that's how I plan to spend our time. So let me kick off with that definition of blended learning. And it's this, and I've taken this from Garrison and Canula, which is this: the thoughtful integration of classroom face-to-face learning experiences with online experiences. Now, I like this quote and I don't like this quote. So let me tell you why I don't like it, and then I'll tell you why I do like it. So I don't like it because it sort of implies, to begin with, that classroom learning and online learning are different. And I would say, well, now, and this is 2004, the quote, you can have virtual classrooms. So the difference is not so obvious. And I think also, as we go through these COVID times, we have to sort of change our own mindset around this. So we need to stay relevant as a profession, and we need to adapt the way we operate in order that we can continue to add value to our customers as much as we can. So that's the reason I don't like it. The reason I do like it is because of that word, the second word there, which I've highlighted for you, the thoughtful integration of classroom and online. So thoughtful, to me, that's an absolutely critical word in this discussion. We have to give it our brain. We have to apply our brains to it. It just doesn't happen by accident. And we need to go through a methodology that helps us get the best solution, as I said, for our customers. So let me ask you, we'll put it in the chat box if that's okay. What element of organizing a blended learning event do you find of interest or potentially of concern? And then I'll see whether that hopefully aligns with some of my thoughts, and we can take it from there. So what might you want to explore? So we'll just put that, if that's okay, in the chat box. Let me just pull up the chat box whilst I'm here. Okay. And of course, the chat box moves so quickly, I can't read it. That's because there's so many. Okay. Find the right balance between content sharing, interaction. Benedict, thank you. Workshop activities, I think that flew by. Training design, Martina, thank you very much. The balance between the two. Okay, good. The attention span of the audience. That's a challenge, I get it. That's my challenge today, right? Interactive activities, says Jane. Okay. What else have we got? Learner engagement, deciding which topics can be done as e-learning and which topic needs discussion with a facilitator. Sherry, that absolutely, couldn't agree with you more on that. Types of learner, okay, that's interesting. Okay. Now I'm getting one quote that says that Simon has started screening and nothing else. Okay, can everyone, if you have some challenges, maybe put it in the box as well. Interaction and internet connection. Okay, all right. There's a few things coming through, which is useful. Different level absorption of learners. Right, okay, thank you, Cherry, that's good. All right, there's a few things coming through here, isn't there? I can see some themes emerging. Interaction, internet, engagement. Engagement's a big issue. I'm picking that as perhaps one of the key themes here. How do we get engagement with people? All right, and I think a couple of people may be getting some internet challenges as well. All right, okay, let me carry on, but thank you for sharing. I really appreciate your input to this, because I think it's all very, very valuable and helpful. So let me just close that off for a second. So let me give you an analogy. I think designing a blended learning event is a little bit like making a film. There are different roles that we need to fill. So there's the role of the audience, obviously. There's the role of the director in the middle. We have the script writer up at the top left. We have a cast of players, as you could see, and we have some technology going on the bottom right there. Now, your audience is probably different to my audience, and your role, as I think we saw from the demographics, it could well be different from mine. So I'm not going to be able to cover everything here, but I would try and touch on a few of the more important things, hopefully, as we start to go. But again, so you might say tailor things according to your own perception. Okay, so let me start by sharing a little bit of jargon. I do apologize now, but I think it's important that we at least understand something as professionals here. So I want to make a difference, a separation here between what you would call, well, the technical word is synchronous learning versus asynchronous learning. I know some people know that already, some won't, so I'm just going to sort of help set the scene here. So synchronous learning, another word might be live, right? So we are a synchronous learning event. We're all together, you are with me, it's a live event. If you're watching later on Facebook, the recording, it's an asynchronous event, it's offline. So imagine you were going to a concert tonight. These things perhaps, I don't know if you have them, we're not allowed any in Australia right now, but so if you were going to a concert tonight, that would be a live event. You would be there, you would be watching it, but if you then came home and watched a recording of it, you watched it on Netflix or whatever, then it's asynchronous, right? It's offline, it's at a later time. So I want you to hold on to those two, synchronous and asynchronous, because I think that's a better differentiation. It's a better way of looking at things rather than talking about some of the other definitions that you might have. So both of these are valid, both play a role in blended learning, and both, and particularly with the live one, that's shifted in the last couple of years from being face-to-face, and particularly with COVID, it's more about this online experience. So let me sort of take a little focus here of some of the advantages of asynchronous. This is offline learning, right? Just to keep the terminology right. So there are some advantages of offline or asynchronous learning, and I think some of it again is fairly obvious, but I think the first one probably is cost. In 2019, I spent nearly 5 months living overseas in various hotels and flying around different places. And most of my participants, because my audience is across the Asia Pacific area, came to me, right? That incurred significant cost in hotels and in flights, and in opportunity cost of them not doing their job. So cost is often cited as one reason why asynchronous offline learning is a good thing to do. It can save money. That's not the only reason to do it, of course. Secondly, asynchronous learning, offline learning, can get to more people. Now, we're doing a Zoom event, and there are limits on Zoom. I think Lawrence told me the other day, I think this one has a limit of 500 100 people. So even technology has limits, whereas asynchronous learning, offline learning, doesn't tend to have that limit. In GE, as I said, we've got 270,000 people in 150 countries. Offline learning, where they access things, is easier to get to. I can't bring 270,000 people to me. It just doesn't work. And at the same time, if people are in very remote locations, it's just sometimes just not possible to get somewhere, certainly at a cost-effective means. So that's an issue, right? So scalability and geography are good reasons to focus on asynchronous learning. Thirdly, I think, and this is a biggie for me, is it offers the opportunity for people to self-paced. I choose when to learn. I can do it and fit things in around my world. And a lot of us have a world that looks very different now than it did 6 months ago. And I know I'm working in a much more flexible way than I have been in the past. And I can focus, I can make time and do the study when I want. So this introduces a level of flexibility, which I think is something that a lot of learners want. So rather than it being driven by a facilitator or trainer as to when you can learn, you have to learn at this time on this date, there's no flexibility, it's up to me. I choose when I want to learn. And again, as I said, that's really important to a lot of people. The fourth reason there around reflection time, and I'm going to come back to that in a little bit, but for a lot of learners, it's important that they get time to think about it. They can choose to reflect, they can choose to give context around that learning, and they can choose to make as much or little time as they want to think about it. Whereas if we're going through a live event, whether it's classroom or virtual, you know, it's probably the facilitator driving that, and reflection time often is a little bit limited. And lastly, and again, I have points I want to come back to on this, it's around community learning, and asynchronous learning can create the opportunities for us to share as a community, which I think is really important. Now, there are some downsides to asynchronous offline learning. We'd be naive to think otherwise. So, for example, it's difficult as a facilitator to keep track of what people are doing. I may not actually know what they're doing, which at the same time can be a challenge for the facilitator, because my role often in the past has been as some sort of expert, right? I'm the one who knows it, and I feel sometimes that it's out of my control. They're driving it. Now, I'll come back again to that point, but I think it's a challenge some of us will face. The third thing is when learners do have a problem, you're not there. If it's asynchronous, it's offline, you're not there to help. So in the moment, they may need some support and you're not able to offer it. And that can be a challenge. Sometimes when it's asynchronous, it can be quite lonely. Many years ago, I did my master's in HR in Sydney, but before that, I did a master's by distance learning, and I started it, I should say. I didn't finish it, and the reason I didn't finish it was because it was all offline learning and there was no support. And after a while, I just gave up because I felt it was too challenging, it was too hard, and I just couldn't. I didn't want to learn like that. It was lonely, I can be honest. So for a lot of learners, offline learning can be that. And lastly, there's this challenge of technology. In fact, that could apply to live as well, of course. But it can be a challenge. Bandwidth is still an issue in certain places. And if you can't access technology because it's not there, then you can't learn necessarily through an offline means. So there are some reasons there. Now, let me get your input. Let me ask you, what might be some advantages or disadvantages of live learning, right? You're going through it now. So feel free to type, again, something in the chat box. What might be an advantage? You can put that with an A, perhaps, A in brackets, or so I know it's an advantage, and D for a disadvantage. What might be an advantage or a disadvantage of online learning? Okay, what have we got? Speaker can help. Bella, yes, thank you. It's in real time. Alan, absolutely, right? So it's happening in the moment. Downside could be, yes, internet connections, thank you. Yep, that's definitely the case. There's more interaction, Rex, yes, true. We can have more interaction, as we hopefully will in a little bit. questions, Jamil, yes, could be answered on the spot. That's always very, very helpful. And again, it's that interaction. That's people like that, right? Connections and interactions, I'm seeing these as all positives. Will the students be able to adapt to technology? That's a really good point. That could be a downside. Not everyone's great with technology. I understand that. Parents have no time to teach their children. Yeah, that's a big challenge in Australia right now. Yeah, you learn it, that's a good point. Very slow internet in the Philippines. I do have one of my colleagues is in the Philippines, and we do have some challenges. I get that, absolutely. There's no pressure, perhaps. Yes, in a live situation, you can't repeat and watch it again. You could, I guess. I suppose that's true. I get that, Katrina. It could be, or you could record it and watch it afterwards, which I guess some people could do. But right in the moment, you can't pause me. Maybe you want to pause me, but you can't do that, unfortunately. Logistics, too many questions, time needed facilitation, yes. And the learning pace is set by the trainer. Thank you, Christine. You're quite right. I'm driving this bus, aren't I? It's my choice as to how quickly we go. All right, they're good. Keep them coming. Let me move on now. So thank you for that. Now here's my simple framework, and I'd like to sort of share this with you. It's based on the work of a guy called William Horton, who invented the word e-learning actually, and he highlighted that there are 3 elements to being successful learning experience. He called them absorb, do, connect, right? So let's keep it really simple. Absorb, do, and connect. So what did he mean by absorb? So he said absorb was about informing and inspiring the audience, informing and inspiring the audience. I like that. It's not just about telling people, because they need to make some sense of it, but it's about inspiring. It's about giving people information that they find interesting, right? So hopefully that's going on, but absorbing is really important. The do piece, he said, was around transforming into information into knowledge and skills. Okay, so transforming knowledge into information and skills. So that's often the practice part. And then the third element was connect. Now he called that closing the gap between learning and the rest of their lives. I get that. So they're trying to get a connection from the material and their experience back to what they need to do. I would say there's another element to that, which is also connecting with other learners. Connecting with other learners. So we put these 3 together, absorb, do, and connect, and we get effective learning. I like that. It's really easy, really simple for me. Now, let's link that back to what I said earlier. And what he found from his research was that there's a link here between asynchronous and synchronous learning. And the best way to absorb information, remember, inform and inspire, is through offline learning. That's the best way, because people can access it when they want, they can make sense of it, they can reflect, all the reasons we shared earlier. That's the best way for people to absorb information. For them to do and connect, then we need a mix of asynchronous and synchronous together. So if you were going onto YouTube, for example, to look at something, that's asynchronous, it's offline. A lot of us can learn that way. Facebook learning, okay, this is live now, it's going out, it's synchronous. We're doing and connecting. Yes, we're doing both of those things at the same time. But when you watch the recording, obviously it will go to being asynchronous. You can go and watch it afterwards. So I get back to my first point. Let's be thoughtful and reflective in the way we design, so that we make sure we include all of these elements: absorb, do, and connect. So let me give you some examples, because you may say, well, I get it, sort of, but what are you talking about, Simon? So here's some examples of absorb. You can see I've listed in there: professional articles, summaries, case studies, videos, technical manuals, quizzes. So these are things that you would want to think about. You don't need to include them all, obviously, but what might be most appropriate for you in terms of absorbing. So I was talking to a colleague earlier on today, and he was talking about how he's doing some technical training around training people in purchase orders. And he was saying his technical training is around how the system is working. But in terms of understanding how how the whole thing fits together, where there are interactions with other departments, for example. He sends them out some background information, which is for them to absorb. So the bigger picture is through offline learning, but he focuses on the online learning event so that they understand the system and changes they need to do. What I would say there, and I've put it on the right, is choose wisely and make it interesting. No one wants to read 1,000 pages of stuff. No one wants to sit through a 95-page PowerPoint presentation and with millions of points. It just doesn't work for people. So choose wisely in terms of the information that you choose. Now I'm going to give you a challenge. Maybe this is just a point of reflection. I know it's a challenge I've dealt with. It may be a challenge some of you have thought about or maybe are dealing with it, and it's this: how do we? What is our role? Let's keep it simple. What's our role? Is it as a teacher expert? So when we're facilitating something, is it as a teacher expert, or are we? So the picture on the left, or are we a co-creator and guide? What's our role? Where do we sit? And for a lot of people, I think they probably tend to sit on the left, and there may be some cultural elements that in some countries, if you're a trainer, facilitator, you have to be or seem to be in that position. But let's also ask, what's the role of the person being trained? Do you see them as a passive student? Is that what you want them to be? Or do you want to see them more as an active learner? So before we get too far in here, and again, I don't have a definitive answer, but I would just throw it out to you. Have a think about, when you put together a blended learning event, what's your role? Are you the teacher expert, or are you the creator, co-creator and guide? Because it will inform the decisions you make in how you put your material together, how you design things, the approach you have, the culture you build in your learning event. So focus on that. Personally, I tend to go more to the right these days in terms of co-creator and guide. It's not always easy because you feel that you want to give them the answer, but I think when people learn themselves, that often is better, and I'm there to steer them rather than to have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. I never have had, and I never will have, and often the audience has more to know about it than I do. So just a thought for you to perhaps reflect on, and I see some comments in the chat that are really helpful, so thank you for that. Okay, so that was absorb. Let me talk a little bit about do, and apologies if you're not a Star Wars fan here, but do or do not, there is no try, which is my feeble link to the do piece. So let me give you some examples of do. So, and again, I've put an S here for synchronous, S, live, or A for asynchronous. Things that you might want to reflect on. And again, I don't give you the answer here. I'm just saying these are options for you. These are things you could choose to do in your design choices. So clearly it's the classroom. It could be a physical classroom. For me, that's not an option right now. I haven't delivered a classroom event since February, and probably won't for until next February, if not later. So classroom has to be virtual for me. You can do live video demonstrations. So what do I mean by that? So for example, you could, and it doesn't need a lot of technology. It does not need a lot of technology. You literally, a mobile phone, you can stream. So if you want to demonstrate something, you can do that by streaming. You can stream, again, I take technical limitations with the internet, but just doing a live video demonstration is one way of showing others how it's done. Okay, so easy. Webinars, we're having one now. Okay, it's a live synchronous event. And then there are other things to think about, like peer coaching, where we help one another. It could be live, where we pair people up or put them in trios, or it could be asynchronous. You write something on a notice board, they write back with their thoughts, etc. So it could be that. Ditto with a group project. A group project is, again, a great way for people to learn, because you put them into a real situation. They have to focus on something and work as a team. There are other skills they develop as a result of that. And then games and puzzles I quite like. I build that into my into my learning events. I've got one next week, for example, where I've created some fun learning for people to go through, which isn't related necessarily to the topic, but it gets people's brains working. And lastly, of course, the sort of classic in terms of asynchronous learning, those online learning modules that people go through. So these are just some examples, but I do want to focus a little bit on the classroom, because I think the virtual classroom, because there was some comments in the chat, and it's something I know others are interested in, and I see from previous webinars has been touched on. So let me give you my thoughts on the virtual classroom, and I've got 6 tips. There are a lot more, but these are just my 6. Okay. So the first one is be careful using a physical classroom slide deck. Right? Be careful with that. And I think a lot of people assume that I can use my physical classroom slide deck and just show the slides in a virtual case, and that isn't the truth. So let me give you an example of how not to do it. So this is a real slide. This is from our healthcare business. This was used in a classroom, and I don't know about you, but I'm old, I know, but I can't read it. That's the first thing. It's really unclear and difficult to read. Text is too small. It may be great as a handout, perhaps, but I can't read that. The font size is all over the place, and it's just a messy, that diagram of genomics, I don't know what that is, but it's really hard to actually look at, and there's too much information on the screen. So here's the updated version, which is exactly the same information, exactly the same, but it's repackaged in, I think, a much clearer way. You'll see a lot of white space on the screen. It's simplified. There's a lot less going on. The text is a lot bigger. The keyword 12, you remember anything, you remember 12, right? You remember that after this presentation. So things that you want to be clear about are much clearer. And equally, the title, the previous one was the opportunity or something, what opportunity? But I think that's much more useful when you give people something specific. What else in the classroom? Interaction is important. Now, in a short webinar like we have, it's a little bit more tricky, right? So I don't have huge numbers of times to go to you, but I think it's always important to interact. One of my colleagues, Elena Kousis, who's done a previous presentation for you, says interact every 5 minutes, right? Make sure people are doing something. Chat box, polling, whatever it happens to be, right? Get people to do things. Otherwise, they multitask. They put you on, mute. Some of you are probably doing it already, right? You've got him on mute. I'm just checking my email. It happens, right? It's just reality. So make sure there's opportunities for interaction, and the platform that you use, make the most of them. The emoticons, for example, everyone loves those. So use what you have as available to make sure there's interaction. Okay, I think that's, to me, a really important and critical element of making virtual training interesting. Thirdly, have a producer. Now, producer, moderator, Lawrence is with us today. You can call them different things, but I'm using my analogy of film from earlier on. I think having someone to help you is really, really good. I know when I started to run my virtual classes, I struggled because there was the technology. We used Skype broadcast mainly in GE. Skype broadcast, I had my new slide deck. I had people messaging me. I had this fear that things were going to collapse and fall over, and I was a wreck. By the time the session had finished, I was exhausted. I was absolutely out. It's very stressful. If you've not run online learning, there is an element of stress. So have someone available who can deal with issues in the background when people can't connect, or is sharing the results of a poll, or setting up the poll, or just moderating a discussion behind the scenes, is really, really important and adds a lot of value. I know it's not always possible, but if you can, try and pair up with someone. And certainly I've been very lucky to have that in my time in GE. One other tip I've learned, and I share this based on my colleague's experience who does a lot of work in the technical space, is to say that a one-day physical class does not equal a one-day virtual class. You can't take 8 hours of material from a physical class and turn it into an 8 hours of virtual. I mean, I ran a virtual class once, which was 4 hours long. And at the end of it, I felt like a zombie. And to be honest, I suspect they did too. It's just not possible to sit there for 8 hours in a virtual space. And in any event, if you're mixing up offline and live, you wouldn't want to do that. You would need to work out which of this stuff sits better offline and which sits better in a live situation. So think carefully. Don't go, I've got a slide deck here it's a 2-day class, I'll run a 2-day virtual. It just doesn't work like that. It just doesn't work like that. The other thing I think I know from my own experience of running online events is I need to set expectations. For me, the class starts before they come. That's the asynchronous part. That's when I send them out material. I send them out the joining instructions. I send them articles to read, videos to watch, the asynchronous part, the offline part. They have to do that. That's part of the learning. And I monitor that. We monitor that behind the scenes. Also, people need to understand that virtual learning it's not a meeting. You're not sort of sitting there passively on mute. It's interactive. And I say to people, when you're with me, I'm going to ask you by name. So don't be surprised if I say, "Hey, Lawrence." And Lawrence is in the background. I go, "What? Wake up!" Because people, I'm going to use the name, right? So set expectations, have a screen on what it is, and be clear about it, so people know when they turn up what they need to do, and before they get to you. And lastly, it's an obvious one, but allow time for failure of the technology. I can't tell you the number of times I thought it was going to work, and in reality, it didn't actually work. And there was glitches and all sorts of things. So always give yourself plenty of time and a backup plan if you can with technology. Talking of time, here's my tips on time. Plan what you want to cover live and offline. I do, think. You need to think carefully about that. So think of the 80-20 rule if you want. What's the most important things you want to get across? Where does that need to sit? Make sure you prioritize what's you think is most important that can be done live. Because there are some things you can't do offline, and there are some things you really probably prefer to do offline. So think intentionally, where do I need to focus a live event? What is it I need to specifically do? And at the same time, recognize that time moves quickly. I'm looking at time already thinking, okay, Simon, just need to watch the time. When I run a classroom event, when I'm out there, on some of my events have been in the past been 5 days long. It doesn't matter if I run behind 15 minutes, half an hour, hey, even longer. But when it comes to the virtual world, you have to stick to deadlines. People expect you to finish on time. There's not a lot of places to go when you've got such limited time. And it goes real quick as I'm looking at the time as my watch now. Having said that, you have to allow thinking time for learners. It's not all about you doing the talking. Give them some reflection time. Give them a minute or two here and there to think about things. And lastly, make sure that you consider what's realistic for 500. There's 500, whatever on the call here, or it needs to, whatever it is. But you can do different things with 5. 5 is very different from 500 or 5,000. Okay, so address the size of your audience when it comes to time. Now, the last one is connect. And I've called this the secret sauce because I think it's something I've neglected in the past when I put my sort of learning recipes together. So I'll be honest there. But and today's part of that, this is secret sauce, right? We're connecting in terms of this event. So when we talk about connecting, and my focus here is not necessarily on connecting the material back to the workplace. I get that. I just assume you know that too. I'm more focused here on connecting people. And I think that's an aspect of learning we've probably neglected, I know I have, over the years, and I need to think more about that. So learners help one another. They can help other offline. In fact, they enjoy helping each other. And when they do that, often there's a sense of reassurance. I know when I was doing my master's, I'd phone my friend and say, "Have you done this? How's it going?" And she'd say, "Oh, it's okay, I've done that." So you feel that you're, okay, I'm not alone, right? So being able to connect with people does help a lot of us. At the same time, when I connect offline or with other people, I can share things, right? I've got an idea that I might share, and I pick up on that. And in a virtual class or a live class, maybe not everyone feels comfortable speaking up, whereas in an offline situation, or we can connect, that's really terrific. People want to be able to make this information connect with what they're doing. So it gives people a sense of purpose when you do connect. We're all doing it together. We're all focused on this, which at the same time means that I'm likely to do what I need to do. If others are relying on me because we're doing a piece of group work together, then chances are I will actually make it happen rather than make excuses and not do it. And the last couple of points there is, I think when people do connect, they like to share their experience. Generally, people like to tell you what they've done, and we learn very effectively from others sharing their experience. And of course, if you want to be part of that as a facilitator, that's really fine. So, last couple of thoughts. Here's some examples of Connect. If you want me to be specific, I can't give you any insights on Slack or Confluence. I'm aware of them as tools, but there are communities, there are online communities you can engage in to make it work for you. Again, it's your choice. Maybe your company has a particular way of doing things. You would need to explore that. All right, so just to sort of draw it to a close, and then I've got a little checklist to share with you. My sort of thoughts around this, I really like this model. Absorb, think, how are you going to design something? Absorb, what do they need to absorb? Make it interesting, remember, and inspiring. What are the do elements? How do we bring the knowledge and skills to life? And how do we connect the material back to the workplace and connect learners together? And then think about, is it going to be online or is it going to be offline, right? Or is it going to be live and is it going to be offline, right? So, and don't get too hung up on the jargon. So if I was going to give you a last checklist and then we get some questions, this would be it. What content do I need to deliver live versus what can they do offline? Question number one. Question number two, what activities have I designed that specifically address absorb, do, and connect, rather than just just by accident, which has been some of my design in the past. What's my role, which I talked about? What do you want to be? Is it a mix of those? Is it one or is it the other? Do people need to meet physically? Hard now, if not impossible, but hopefully that will come back in due course. Or can technology be the answer to everything? Yes or no, I'm not sure. How do I maintain engagement and interaction, simply because it's really critical to learning? How do I create a learning community? And please don't recycle old slides, create some new ones for the online experience. Okay, if you would, I'm happy to take questions, but in the meantime, I'd love to hear from you. What's the most useful idea I've learned today? Please feel free to pop something into the chat box whilst we're continuing the discussion. I'll stop sharing my slides. I know they will be available, and then we'll take some questions, and I think Liz will help us to draw it to a close. All right. Okay. Good. All right. Thank you. So let me. I hope you found that useful. I tried to stick with the time. Right. People are liking the virtual tips, the absorb, do, and connect. Good. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for the comments. That's really helpful. I really like that. You can use both synchronous and asynchronous. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly the case. And I think you should. Right? You should. There's not one better than the other. All right. Should we do some questions?
All right. Thank you, Simon, for sharing with us your insights on the topic, how to organize a blended learning event. Now I've got a few questions here prepared for you. So I'll start with the first one.
Make them easy, Lawrence. Make them easy.
I'll start with the easiest one. So some of our learners found it enlightening that not all content should be delivered live. But how do you then identify the balance in terms of the amount between synchronous and asynchronous content?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. How do you balance the two? What should you do? And sometimes there is no simple answer to that, okay? I think you have to look at what's realistic, and sometimes that's not driven by you. So your sponsor for the event may say, Simon, and I've had this in the past, Simon, I can only spare people for this amount of time. Okay, now I may want more on that, and we can negotiate it, but it's sometimes you're given a specific amount of time that they need to be available in a live session. As far as they're concerned, offline happens, by magic. But so sometimes it's driven by others. I think what is important is to work out what are the critical elements. There are lots of nice to dos, lots of that would be interesting, but what are the key things you need to focus on? What is it you couldn't do offline, and what do you need to make sure that they hear, or where you need to perhaps get some interaction and get that dialogue going. So I don't have a definitive answer, but I think it's something that is depending perhaps on the topic and depending on the audience.
Thanks, Simon. Now, this is something that's also very timely. I'm not sure if that's the same case with you there back home, but here in the Philippines, we've actually moved and we're looking at rolling out blended learning even for primary, secondary, and at the tertiary level of education. So one of the questions here would be, is it advisable for children to undergo blended learning if their parents are working? What are your thoughts on that?
And I'm not a parent, so you're probably asking the wrong person, but it's a good question. I know I have colleagues whose children are getting to grips in Australia with certainly online learning, and the parents actually struggle more, I think, than the children. Maybe that's my impression. I don't know if that's right or not, but they're sort of like, the parents are more perhaps, my experience is that children are actually very flexible. They're just like, okay, well, this is normal, right? This is what we need to do. But I think there are also some inequalities with this, that the richer families tend to be better equipped for this than perhaps the poorer families. And that worries me slightly. I think that's more of a political issue perhaps than a learning issue. But I think we need to be careful we don't disadvantage people through online learning. But there's no choice at the moment. So blended has to be a combination of live classes and articles, book, whatever the other ways of learning, the offline learning stuff. Yeah, I have a friend who's a teacher, and I know she's struggling with it right now as well.
Thank you.
So Sherry's put in the comments, the parents get stressed while working from home and trying to assist their children. Yeah, it's like,
that's very true.
I get it.
Especially for us in the teaching profession, both if you're teaching children or adults, you get to teach at work, and then when you go home, you get
doing some more. Yeah, except it's free. It's free at home, Lawrence. You don't get paid for it.
I agree. So that was a question by Bisnar Crescentia. So thank you for asking that question, Bisnar. Another question here, Simon, is that there seems to be quite a lot of questions regarding engagement. So the question is, how do we then assess and ensure that there is engagement both on the asynchronous and the synchronous types of delivery?
Yeah, if we're thinking about synchronous as in terms of webinars or live virtual events, I think that is a challenge, because so one thing I didn't say, but I'm a big fan of cameras. Right? So if people are on a webinar, I encourage people to have their camera on. Now, again, there are bandwidth issues, there's technology issues generally, but I would ask people to turn them on. This is a bit, this is not mainstream in thinking perhaps, but people often say, put yourself on mute. I always say, don't. I'd rather people were not on mute, unless there's a really noisy background. And I say that because the temptation when you're on mute is to start disappearing and doing things, especially if the camera's off. Right? If you're live, I can see you, and the camera's and the mic is on. I can hear when you're typing. Right? So you'll be surprised the number of people who think they've got silent keyboards. Newsflash, everyone, you don't. And most of the platforms actually have a little thing indicating when there's noise and who it is. So I would encourage you to put cameras on where it's culturally appropriate. It's not in every country to do that. And if it's a small group, can't do it with hundreds, but a small group, ask them to leave their mic off. So I think that's the engagement piece, and asking questions and etc. Those are good tips. Further off, engaging people offline in terms of that, I would, there are options here. So I think you can bring the offline learning into the live event. So debriefing what people have done in the live event is a way of linking those two together. So here's what you were, this was the reading. So next week, for example, I'm running a workshop, and it's live, it's a 3-day live event, but there's pre-work. And the first webinar is, give me your reflections on the pre-work. So I'm asking people to comment live about what they learned, so that I can see whether they were engaged. I can see whether they actually found it interesting and what they took away from it. And that's part of the setting expectations. So try and link the two would probably be my tip on that.
Thanks, Simon. Now I have here, you mentioned earlier that 1-day physical class is not equivalent to a 1-day virtual class. The question then is, based on your experience, what is the usual equivalent of a 1-day physical class in virtual class terms if one is to migrate them?
All right. Okay. That's unfortunately the answer is it depends. I would say, look, if you're doing something virtually, I think generally it works in bite-sized portions. So I've run live sessions from anything from 30 minutes to 4 hours. I've never gone past 4 hours. I never will. So I would say, at the most, do a 2-hour session, or for 1 hour, I think better, or 2 hours max. And if you need to, spread them out, right? There's no reason why you need to do it all in one day. You could do 2 or 3 sessions over a period of time. But if you're transferring some of the learning from live to offline, then you can cut it back. A day can become half a day easy, right? So just don't try and do days of online learning, because you're going to kill them, basically, mainly of boredom.
Now, Simon, I've got here 2 questions very specific to the context of the pandemic.
Sure.
The first one is, what are your insights about the effectiveness in terms of absorption of information when running blended learning programs in a pandemic setup? Like, I think this is also under the context of versus a non-pandemic setup. Do you think there's an effect to the absorption rate?
It's a good question. I think, to be honest, the jury's out, because we're still in the middle of it. What I do suspect is a lot of people at home have a lot of going on. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of distraction. There's a lot of stress, and people are still struggling with that. I mean, I struggle with it. So I think that can impact people's ability. So in a lot of households, you would have multiple people learning from home, for example. You've got the kids, plus you've got, potentially mum and dad. So, everyone's trying to do it together almost, and there's all the noise that goes on with that. So I think it's very hard. What I would say is, I think the best tip is try and carve out some space at home for you. Carve out a quieter space, this is where I go to learn. Even if you can, it's a room on your own. You close the door so you can focus, and then when you finish learning, you leave that space if you can, right? I think that's probably one way of trying to maintain focus and to do it. But I think, time will tell with this. It's too early to assess.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks to Benedict for asking that question. And the second question regarding the context of pandemic would be, how do you, I think this might be on a more personal level, how do you promote or sustain mental well-being among your learners as we promote learning amidst the panic and stress brought about by this pandemic?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So in GE, we have run sessions on mental health. I think, we offer a helpline if people want to access that. And it's really more, I guess, in the sort of HR space rather than the learning space. I think we have to be realistic again about what people are dealing with. And recognize that I have got some challenges. I think being empathetic to that. So for example, I have people who say to me, look, I can't attend this session, Simon. This is going on in my life right now because of COVID. And where I can, I just say, okay, fine. Do what you need to do and come at a later session. We'll run it again some point. Come again. You don't have to do it now. Sometimes that's not an option, but if you can, I think what you can do is cut cut people some slack, you know, give them some a little bit of help and be empathetic, and that goes a long way to help.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks to Eileen Omadto for asking that question.
Yeah,
and
good question.
Your response to that can also be the answer to the question of Nico, which is how do you approach people who are scared of technology? So when you mention that you can help them, this is basically how do you do that? You show empathy to your learners to ensure that they don't get left behind with the
Sure. I think that's good, and I think it's about setting expectations. So before the class I have next week, it's 3 days. I've already run a call. I ran three calls already. Each of them was about setting expectations of what the class was about, but we also spent time playing with the technology. So in that sort of pre-call event, which lasted an hour, we spent time with the technology, and I guided people. We made it fun, we made it interesting. So that if there was any concerns about it, then we can address them before the event starts. What you don't want is to start the event and people are having technical problems, or they don't know how to use the technology, or they're just frightened by it. But I get it. It's tough. So I think, yeah, do something on the platform if you can before people get together. But it is hard.
Thanks, Simon. I think we can get to the last questions for the interest of time. So advance apologies to our other learners. You have a lot of good questions, but what we will do is to forward these questions to Simon, and perhaps you can connect with him on LinkedIn, and perhaps you can share through his network the answers to some of your questions. But to ask you the last question, this one is coming from Vilma. So the question is, what do you suggest in terms of scheduling the asynchronous and the synchronous portions or segments of learning? How do you suggest people schedule them? Like, I think the specific context here is in the perspective of students.
Right. That's a good one. I think you can't, the scheduling has to be, you can't leave huge gaps. You can't leave massive gaps. You can't have an activity and then meet 6 months later in a live class. On the other hand, I think it is advantageous to schedule things where there is an activity, some activities to do. Then there's a live event. I'm thinking it's virtual these days. Then as a post-event, again, more reflection, more activity. So I think there has to be a flow. Now, how much gap you leave between them probably is again up to some debate. I personally would run it over a couple of weeks, maybe. I think that's probably the most I would do. Otherwise, people lose interest, and then you're starting to bump into issues that people have got holiday. There's all sorts of things. I can't do it now, and things have gone. So absolute most, I'd probably think over a couple of weeks, but space it out so that people have a bit of reflection time.
Thank you so much, Simon. So again,
thank you.
For the others whose question are still up in the Q&A tab, what we'll do is we'll forward this to Simon, and please connect to Simon via his professional networking sites. So again, thanks again, Simon. So any parting words that you want to share with our learners this morning before we wrap up the session?
No, I'd say thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. It's been some great comments in the chat box and some great questions. So thank you very much, and good luck with your blended learning.
Thank you. So I'm sure that our almost 300 participants, both in Zoom and Facebook Live, have learned a couple of important things regarding blended learning this morning. For me, my key takeaway is that it's not really what's more effective, asynchronous or synchronous, but I think it's, as you mentioned, it's the good blend between the two and identifying what works best for your particular context or audience. So now we move to, so again, my name is Lawrence Ko, and thank you for the opportunity to moderate the talk of Simon. So I will now give the floor back to our anchor and host, Luz Mercurio.
Thank you very much, my good friend Simon, for sharing your time and expertise in virtual learning with us. We are also grateful to you, Lawrence, for enhancing the interaction as the moderator of this engaging session. To our dear participants, we have 262 present in Zoom room, and we have reached 1,462 viewers in Facebook. We hope to see you next Thursday as we bring you another important session which we really designed for you. The session title is Moving Practical Tips or practical skills training to virtual platform with guest speaker Princess Esguerra, HR Director of Robinson's Land Corporation. For those of you starting to create training modules, we invite you to attend the Fundamentals of Facilitating Design Sprint for L&D Professionals on August 17 and 18 with Arthur Flores Jr. as our speaker. Once again, this is Luz Mercurio, your anchor for today's Tech Train session. Thank you very much and good afternoon.